Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Lunch and Learn on PhotoView 360. Today we will be taking a closer look at creating rendered images from your CAD models. This image that you guys see here was created using PhotoView 360, as well as a few added touches from Photoshop done by Jesse. Today we're going to start by taking a look at the SolidWorks tools that you guys already have access to, even if you don't have PhotoView 360. In just a moment, Jesse's going to be stepping you through looking at these tools like Real View Graphics, using the shadows to your advantages, a new tool for 2012 which is ambient occlusion, as well as the perspective view.
Before we get to PhotoView 360, I want to touch on a couple of options we have available to us in SolidWorks to make a more realistic looking image. These options would be used if you're just grabbing a quick screenshot and you want to make your image look more realistic. The first thing I'm going to do is change our display style. I'm going to change our display style to shaded. This removes the edges. Obviously in real life you don't have your edges outlined in black. This helps a little bit, but it still looks fairly cartoony. The second thing I'm going to do is check out our options under View Settings. Under View Settings, we have 4 options available to us. We're going to use each of these 4 settings to produce quickly a better looking image. Turning on Real View Graphics will produce better looking results from our materials and our lighting. As soon as I turn that on, you can see it immediately richens up the color and our shadows and lighting are improved. Moving down the list, we have shadows and shaded mode. As soon as I turn this on, you'll see the shadows become much more pronounced from the lighting in our scene. Once I turn this on, you can see the ridges, the shadows coming in, the hard lines from the lights in our scene shining on our geometry. Thirdly, we have ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is my favorite feature. This is new in 2012 and will only work if Real View is already turned on. Once I choose ambient occlusion, it will include shadows based on the geometry. Ambient occlusion works better on flat models of a single color. Once I turn this on, you will see a huge difference. Now, just the ambient occlusion alone has made this image look significantly more realistic. You can see the shadows in here from overhangs look much better and much more like your eye would see the model in real life. Fourthly, I'm going to add a perspective. Perspective makes the model look like we're just looking at this on the ground. Everything in real life has perspective on it. It makes it tougher to draw in perspective, so I usually have it turned off. But if I'm going to grab an image, I'll turn it on. This gives us a much more realistic look. And you can see as soon as that's turned on, it does in fact look more realistic. Now with perspective, we actually have some adjustability here. Under View, we can go to Modify and change the amount of perspective that our model has. Default is 3. If I reduce this number, we'll get a more dramatic perspective. Now you can see that once I have this changed, I have a much more exaggerated view than I had before. So you can use this adjustment to really get the view that you're looking for. I'm going to take this one step further and add a decal. Now to add a decal, we can check out our appearances and go to decals. I'm going to go one step further and actually use a product from Adobe. This is a good example of how SolidWorks products can work very well in conjunction with other software packages. I have gotten this image off the internet, but it really doesn't suit my needs for a decal. I am going to pre-select this and select just that section so I can use that for a decal. If I copy this section, I'm going to create a new file and use this in transparency mode. There's a specific reason why I want to do that. Once this is pasted in, I can save this. And I'm going to save this as a PNG. Saving that as a PNG will allow that file to be used with an alpha channel. What an alpha channel is a section that has no color. And you can see when I get back to SolidWorks why that's going to be important. What I want to do now is to add that PNG to my model. I'm going to view in the direction that I want to see this applied to, and I'm going to choose our decal mode. Right click, I want to add a decal and browse to my file. Now that I've selected my file, I can make use of that alpha channel that I mentioned a minute ago. Down here you can see I have an option to use decal image alpha channel. If I select that on, it will pull from file the transparencies. I want to apply this, and as I shrink this down, you'll be able to see what that transparency has done for me. As I shrink this, you can see that the corners of the image are gone, and all I have is the circular cap that I was looking for in my decal. Sizing this to fit. I now have a pretty good looking image in comparison to the model that I just had. This is a quick way to make a screenshot.
So now let's take a look at PhotoView 360. In the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to be going over the ins and outs of creating a rendered image. We're going to start by applying appearances to your model, positioning the viewpoints like cameras and angles and perspective, things like that. How to set up your scene. With that goes with setting up the lighting. And then how to use the preview pane to your advantage so you can see what your rendering is going to look like before you actually wait the time for the full rendering. And then we'll go over making some final adjustments, which is basically going back and readjusting the lighting. And then how to get your final rendering and which output you would like your final rendering to be. And then Jesse's going to talk a little bit about the post-processing here, which kind of incorporates using your rendering and bringing it into Photoshop and touching it up to make it have that extra special look to it. Let's take a look at how to apply some appearances to make our model look better. We're going to start by going to our task pane under the Appearances, Scenes, and Decals tab. And as you can see, we have quite a list of different appearances that we can use. Now, when we go to apply an appearance, there's more than one way to do so. I'm going to show you the most common way and easiest one that I think. And it starts by pinning up our task pane so that it doesn't disappear on us every time we make a selection. First, I'm going to apply some textured material to this model just so I can show you a lot of the settings and adjustability that we have. So let me grab some sort of material that's got some texture to it. And the easiest way I find is to just left click, drag and drop, and as you can see, as I hover over my different views here, I have the ability to apply it at the assembly, the part, the faces, the bodies, so on and so forth. I'm going to apply this at the assembly level. Now, I don't really like how rough the material is. I want it to look a little bit smoother. Well, we adjust that in one of two ways. We can go to our Appearances tab here. We could come in and adjust the appearance from there. Or, in SOLIDWORKS, we have another tab called our Display Manager atop of our feature tree. And in here, we have the ability to look at our appearances, our decals, and our cameras and lights and stuff like that. So if I bring up my Appearances tab here, it sorts my order by history. I can also sort alphabetically. And if I scroll to the bottom, it's going to have the last material that I just added. And I can right click and edit the appearance right there. This tool over here makes it very nice and easy to go back and make your changes. So while we're in here, let's take a look at the different settings that we have. First, we have an Illumination tab. This is where we can adjust how much the light diffuses on the surface, if it's got any sort of reflection. And you can see as I remove the reflection from the lights, it doesn't get as washed out. And that's the light reflecting off the surface. Now, since this is a relatively low gloss material, I'm going to keep it kind of low on the reflective scale. There's a lot of settings in here. We can make it transparent if we would like to, be able to kind of see through the model, make it look like it's clear plastic or something. And this last setting here, the luminosity setting, the headlights in that picture that we first looked at of that BMW were actually just a white material applied, and then we added some luminous intensity to it so that it looked like it was a light projecting from the surface. Now, if we go over to the surface finish obviously is set to the finish of the model. We have different types of surface finish if we were to do a smooth color, but because this one has texture to it, that's not of any importance at this point. The important one is the mapping tab. This is going to allow us to adjust how big or small the scaling is. So if I drag this guy down, let's just say right about there, it gives me a much smaller scale to my texture and looks much better to the eye. And that is adjustable by numbers as well as just kind of dragging the little box like I did, like you saw Jesse do on the decals. Now let's add another color here to this plate. Let's just do a normal medium gloss plastic. Even though this is going to be a metal plate in the end, I'm still going to use the plastic because the properties that are applied in the plastic are generally the nicest settings for your renderings. And that's mainly because we have high gloss, medium gloss, low gloss. If you're using things like the car paint, there's really nothing other than high gloss. And that's fine if that's what you're looking for. But I generally stick to using plastics. So I'm going to change this to a medium gloss, let's say red. And again, we're going to drag and drop it and apply it. Now, as you can see, it's kind of washed out again. And that's because of our setting on our illumination tab for the reflections. It's defaultly set to use the same reflection as I had on my last material. So if I want to remove the reflection, I get that deeper red. And again, the reflections are coming from the lighting. Okay, let's add some more realistic colors to our guitar. The piece right here that's in red, I'm going to just add a medium gloss black plastic to it. And just as before, I'm just drag and drop it on there. However, I do not want this piece to show any reflections in my end rendering. So I'm going to come into my illumination and take the reflection amount down to 0. Now as for the rest of this piece here, I'm going to use a white porcelain for it. And as you can see, we have some different organic materials that we can use. There's water, gemstones, miscellaneous. We could make our guitar out of grass if we really wanted to. But the stone one here has a stoneware, and they have bone china and some ceramic. The porcelain has some nice glossiness to it. Again, a white plastic would probably be pretty close to it. However, the porcelain is very, very bright and white.
Now let's take a look at changing the orientation of your model. Typically with a SolidWorks model, we would spin this just with our rotate or with our pan, get this in the position that we want. That works fine. We can save this using our spacebar as a new view. What we can do in addition to that is use our camera views. When rendering, these camera views are going to become very helpful to us. Under our Display Manager tab, we have access to our cameras. I already have a few cameras added in, but let's go through adding a camera. If I right-click on a camera and hit Add Camera, it brings up a series of options. You'll notice it has split my view pane into 2 views. This is extremely handy. I can zoom this out, rotate this around, and actually see where the camera is. This lets my other view give me the view for what the camera is seeing. There's a lot of options over here, but it's not as complicated as it looks. Generally, I just use the draggable options that we have for the camera. So you can see we can change where the camera is aiming and then change the position of the camera by using these arrows. And you'll notice as I move that camera, my view is updating as to what my camera looks like. Now, using a camera view is going to be helpful to us in rendering because we can save this view along with perspective and all of the properties that go with cameras. So you'll notice as I change this, my view is updating. I can remove perspective, but that's kind of the point of the camera. I can turn this off, but it looks kind of silly. It doesn't look how it would look in real life. Leaving perspective on is what you're going to want to do while rendering. You can manually change these camera parameters, and you can also set to typical cameras. I don't bother setting to typical cameras like I mentioned. I just changed my settings throughout my view with the drag and drop. Another advantage of using cameras is the ability to use this depth of field box at the bottom of our options. If I check this on and scroll down, we have more options available to us. You'll notice as soon as I check that on, I gain 3 planes showing up in my camera view. By moving these planes, I can adjust where the camera focus is located and how wide the focus of the camera is. If I adjust this back, I can set my focus towards the back of the camera. If I shrink my f-stop, I can make a very narrow focused camera. When I view the model in this camera mode and render, you will see that the section that I have in focus will be sharp and all others will be blurry. With my rendering previewed on the camera view that I have just set up, you can see that this back section is in focus while everything else appears out of focus. Adjusting the focal depth of your camera is a powerful way to add realism to any rendering. This gives it the sense of it actually being photographed in real life.
The next step in our process is going to be setting up the scene. And what I mean by the scene is the environment in which we would like this model to show. It could be a picture, it could be other models, pretty much anything you can imagine. Where I'm going to start is back over on our display manager. Previously we were on the appearances section. Now we're going to be under the lights and cameras. So for our scene here, we can right click and we can choose to edit the scene. And there's a lot of settings in here. First off, we can have a background. What the background is would be a static 2D image that stays in the background and does not move based on our rotation. The environment is what will show in our reflections. This currently is set to the kitchen. So if we could have some chrome on our model or something very reflective, you would actually be able to see reflections from a kitchen scene. We can turn on floor reflections. We can adjust where our floor is as well as the height. Now on the advanced side, there's more settings for the floor, so on and so forth. If we go back here though, for my background, I have the ability to set just a static color for the background, make it a gradient image where I can say go from black to white. I can use an image or I can use the environment. Now if I use the environment, you're going to see what is actually going to show in the reflections here. And I can adjust the floor in terms of where I would like that to be. But for our case, I'm going to set it up using an image. Now this image here, you can just browse to it and choose whichever one you want, was our rendered image that we're looking at. And as you can see, if I just accept this, I can rotate my model independent of the image because it's just a static 2D image in the background. Using 2D images for our backgrounds allows us to take our CAD models to the next level. we can actually render them in the environments that they will be used in. The next step in our process is going to be to adjust the lighting for our rendering. Now that's done from our display manager. We go to the scenes, lights, and cameras section, and then we can expand out our lights. Now you're going to notice that there's a lot of lights here. These were created specifically in this rendering before. Your SolidWorks model, when it comes in by default, usually only has an ambient light and maybe one or two directional lights. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at first how to turn them on and off. Then we can edit them, show the lights, and I'll show you guys how to add some new ones. Now if I turn this off in SolidWorks, it's rather tough to see, but watch this front edge. As I turn it on or off, you're going to see how it's going to affect your rendering. So I'm going to leave this on, and then we have all of our directional lights. I generally like to show the lights. That way I can see where they're pointing. And as you rotate the model around, you can get a better idea. We have this spotlight over here kind of shining in this area. And that's probably lighting along the side of this model as well. If you right mouse click over here, we have the ability to edit all the lights. It saves quite a bit of time doing edit all lights, because then you can just click the one that you want to change and you'll be able to adjust your stuff over here. Notice we have that checkbox to keep on in SolidWorks, so there's another place to get to that. The brightness, if I zoom in here, watch this front edge. As I turn it down, you can see the brightness going down, or you can see it get even more washed out and almost too much, like you're staring into the sun. So when we're adjusting this, we want to kind of make it so it's not too bright, but yet not so dim that we're getting funny looking shadows along that side that we're not expecting. Now as far as positioning this light, you can obviously pull it and drag it around your screen, but as you can see, it's kind of difficult because I'm trying to move it in a 3D environment. However, we have these little sliders here where it'll let us adjust it, our longitude and our latitude. Makes it very easy to get it positioned where you want because your preview is constantly updating. Okay, so how about adding a new light here? Let me turn off the show lights, and it's very easy to add a light. We right click and we have a directional light, which is going to be just a narrow directional one. A spotlight would be kind of more of a floodlight type environment, and then add a point light. That would be for like highlighting maybe just a knob or something like that. Just going to show you guys how to add a directional light, but it's the same process for all three. As you can see, it just kind of defaultly comes in pointing down. We have the ability to adjust the ambient lighting, the brightness, how much reflection we get, and then, position it. Where do we want it to show? Adding lights to your model is a quick, simple way of improving your overall rendering appearance.
Now that our setup is complete, let's take a look at some options that control our output. In our render tools, we have an options button. Once the option menu comes up, the first thing we are prompted with is the output size. You can manually set the output size or choose from various presets. Along with this, we can also choose the image output format. JPEG is standard, but you can also change it to whatever you want. Along with this, we can choose where the image is being stored. Further down, we have quality settings. I have mine set to good and maximum for my preview and final render quality. You can reduce your preview or increase your preview depending on how good a quality you want for your preview. I recommend leaving it on good just to speed things up. Obviously, for my final render quality, I like to leave it on maximum. That gives me the best output possible when I render my final image. If you have a need for lower quality images, feel free to reduce this as well. We are also prompted with a gamma that lets us adjust the overall lightness of the image output. As I mentioned before, we have some settings for bloom. Bloom controls the light leaking off of very bright objects. Contour rendering gives us the ability to render images with lines still on them. Generally, for realistic images, I leave this off. Finally, we have direct caustics. Direct caustics control how much light is reflected off onto the floor as it filters through an object. This is similar to light shining on your countertop as it goes through your glass of water. Once we have our settings, we can proceed to the render stage. Before I render any images, I always use my preview. There are two options for preview: integrated preview or preview window. I recommend using preview window. Integrated preview will use your graphics area as the preview. You can actually work in this mode, but unless you have a really fast computer, it can tend to slow things down. I use the preview window. Preview window will pop open a new window and preview your render. This is where those options for preview and final render come into play. Using the preview window is an important step in rendering. The preview window will render much quicker than using a final render, and this allows you to go back and change things. I use the preview window to check to see if I have all my lights set, my shadows are in the proper places, and all my material properties look good. Once this looks set, then you can move on to the final render. Final render will launch a preview if you don't have one already open, and then proceed to the final render. I've sped up this rendering for the sake of time. The number of squares represents the number of cores your computer has available. The more cores, the faster it will render. Once the render is complete, you'll be able to save the image and move on to your next rendering. To create the image you saw on the first slide, I again used Photoshop to add a few finishing touches. Let's go back and start from scratch and see what I added. Using Photoshop or any program that allows for layered editing can be very useful in adding some finishing touches to your images. Let's go through a couple of the things that I've added, and then I'll show you an example of how I added them. First off, I added some lens glare on the headlights. This can actually be added in PhotoView 360 as well under the bloom options. Since I knew that I was going to be bringing this image into Photoshop, I decided just to do it in Photoshop since it would be quicker in my case. I then added some fog lights and some glare on the fogs as well for some additional bloom. I darkened up the side since I felt it was a little too light and added some light on the street light. Bring down some glow to really accent that hot spot on the hood. For one more touch, I added some reflection for the fogs off of the road. Maybe too much since the road isn't really all that reflective anyway, but I wanted to add something to note that those fogs were shining. After that, I added some text and we have a nice image to put on a website or put on the cover of your report. So how did I add any of these things? Quickly with a brush. Let me remove the lens glare and add in a new layer. All I did was choose a color, light blue in this case, since we're going for somewhat of an HID headlight look, and use a brush to add in some glare. Once that's done, I can change the opacity, and I'm left with a little bloom on the headlights. Just little touches make the image seem more realistic. This is a quick example of how you might use another software package to augment your renderings.
I would just like to thank everybody for taking the time out of their afternoon to watch this video. This video will be put up on our website within a few days under the resources section for those of you that may want to watch it again or pass it on to their coworkers. On the screen here is mine and Jesse's email address. Feel free to shoot us an email and give us a message if you have any questions on the things that you've seen in this lunch and learn session. And with that, we'll open it up to questions.